Hey there. I'm excited to announce this to you today. This is what you've been waiting for in your spiritual quest. This is something I've wanted to do for a long time, and I'm finally ready to announce it that it's ready to go. It's the Grief to Growth Community Circle. Now, this is a sanctuary where like-minded souls are united in their journey through grief and towards personal transformation. It's more than just a place. It's a beginning. It's a commitment to growth and understanding. Here you're finding not just a community, but you're entering a circle of trust and depth. You're going to engage with interactive coursework. You'll dive into exclusive podcast episodes and partake in discussions that illuminate the path from mourning to empowerment. This is a realm where every question is honored and every individual's journey is validated. To be part of this exclusive circle, visit us at grieftogrowth.com/community or look for the chat icon at the bottom of every page on the main website. Remember, the entry is a privilege because I want to ensure that every member is as dedicated and genuine as you are. You must apply to join, but the journey within is worth every step. So go ahead and join us today. Check it out, grieftogrowth.com/community, and I look forward to seeing you there.
Hi there. Welcome to Grief to Growth podcast. Your host is Brian Smith, spiritual seeker, best-selling author, grief survivor, and life coach. Brian believes that the worst tragedies of life provide the greatest opportunity for growth. Brian says he was planted, not buried, and he is here to help you grow where you've been planted by the difficulties in life. In each episode, Brian and his guests will share what has helped them to survive and thrive. It is his sincere hope this episode helps you today.
So I've got with me Pierre Pradervand. Pierre is a fascinating man who's lived an adventure-filled life, I would say. I'm going to read a short bio of Pierre, and then we're going to talk about his latest book. So Pierre is a true world citizen. He's labored a great deal of his life for social justice, living in or visiting 40 countries on every continent. He now lives in Geneva, Switzerland. He's active as a writer, speaker, and workshop facilitator, helping people to live simpler yet richer, more contented lives. His workshops provide personal development tools that empower attendees to strengthen their internal anchors and to advance their spiritual path. He's also an independent celebrant for weddings, burials, and other events. And I want to introduce him by reading this short little clip here. It says, "Can you imagine what it would feel like to never feel any resentment for any wrong done to you? To respond with full awareness of all situations rather than react from your gut? What freedom that would entail? Well, this is just one of the gifts of the practice of blessing from the heart, sending out focused love, energy for what will do for you. This book that we're going to talk about today, 365 Blessings to Heal Myself and the World, will help you go from bestselling author, The Gentle Art of Blessing, will help you learn to bless all situations and people as you go through the day and add overwhelming joy and presence to your existence." So that sounds like a great subject to talk about today, Pierre, and I want to welcome you to Grief to Growth.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's such a treat for me, really. I mean it from the heart, to be speaking on in-depth issues with people who are really listening.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you being here, and I've read the book, and it's fantastic, and I want to talk about that. First, I want to give the audience a sense of who you are. I know you've lived, you said, in 40 countries on every continent. How did that come about?
Well, let's say I've lived and traveled in 40 countries.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't lived in all of them, but
right.
I was my father was minister of the Swiss Church during the war in London, and I was a few weeks old when they returned to London and spent the whole war in London. We were bombed out twice. Mm-hmm. And I'll be eternally grateful to my parents because they gave me the most precious gift in my life, perfect bilingualism, English, French. I always spoke English with my mother, French with my dad. And that's been so precious in my life. Then we came back to Switzerland in 1948, and when I finished my high school, that's around 1920 in Switzerland, I did a year of social work in the slums of the port city Marseille in southern France, and there were many African immigrants in that city, and that suddenly opened my eyes and my heart to Africa. And I returned home, did my studies, first 2 years of theology. That really wasn't my cup of tea. And I moved over to sociology, which I really enjoyed very much studying. And then I did 1 year of work in the United Nations, and they offered me, Brian, a life contract. That was done in the 1960s, a life contract with a salary at least 30 times the average Geneva salary, at least. 2 months vacation instead of 2 weeks per year, special shops, and no taxes. International civil servants in Geneva don't pay taxes.
Oh, wow.
And it was extremely rare that Swiss citizens, because we were not yet member of the United Nations, were hired by the UN. But they offered me, 2 UN organizations offered me a job. And I thought, Pierre, are you born to be a comfortable little bourgeois with a nice little car, a nice little job, a nice little family? And I don't think I've come on earth for that. And I went off to Algeria without even a letter of introduction or hiring me.
Wow.
I met the Minister of Labor at the United Nations, and he said, "Oh, come, we need people like you," because at independence, the Algerians, the 1 million French people who were running the country left the country in a few months. And they were desperate for people with, university level training. And so I arrived at the Ministry of Labor in the morning, and they hired me on the spot.
Wow.
And I had 3.5 difficult but very exciting years in Algeria. And then I went to prepare my doctorate at the University of Michigan, which was those among 2 of the best years in my whole life. And then I went back to Africa, French-speaking tropical Africa, with the American Friends Service Committee. This is a wonderful Quaker organization. And then I worked, later I started the first grassroots family education magazine of the whole of French-speaking Africa. And I had no experience of journalism whatsoever. And I took as editor of the magazine one of the first Senegalese feminists who had no experience of journalism.
Wow.
And people would have said that this is completely crazy. In 3 years, it was the best-selling international magazine in French-speaking Africa.
Wow.
We were the first magazine in the whole of Africa to speak of female circumcision. That was in 1970, 75. So I had a very exciting time. And then I came back in the 80s to Europe and worked for NGOs and started my own workshops in 92. And since 92, I've been running my own workshops and doing a lot of volunteering, and especially one of the very important experiences in my life has been corresponding with an Afro-American death row inmate in Texas who's been 35 years in prison, in jail, for a crime we know he never committed.
Wow. He
was on death row, and we started corresponding, and his letters were so amazing. I published them. I thought, Pierre, you can't keep these letters to yourself. They belong to the cultural heritage of humanity. And I have an extraordinary publisher who accepted to publish a book that was totally different from everything they ever published. And the book was great success. And we put a bank address at the end. People started sending money. We were able to hire a good lawyer and get him out of death row. Because as you know, if you're poor and black in Texas, your chances of having any kind of justice are really minute. His first lawyer, appointed by the state, was a drunkard who never visited him before the trial, who used to fall asleep in the courtroom and nobody even woke him up.
Oh, wow.
And was constantly drunk.
Yeah.
And so we got a good lawyer, got him off death row, but he's still in prison. But he's doing extraordinary work. He's transforming a prison of 2,200 inmates. He's completely transforming the culture of that prison.
Wow.
And my publisher has just asked me to write a third book on Roger McGowan. And there is a website. May I give the website?
Absolutely, sure.
www.rogermcgowan, McGowen,
Okay.
.org.
Okay.
I repeat, www.rogermcgowan, all linked, .org.
Great. Wow.
And this book is transforming lives in the whole world. I just received a letter from Thailand, from one of the worst prisons in the world, the Bang Kwang Central Prison in Thailand, which is you can see on YouTube, there's a BBC film, 1 hour film on Bang Kwang Central Prison. And this place is an absolute horror. And this guy is telling me that he found this book. I don't know how it got there in the prison. And this book transformed his life.
Wow.
So Roger is a soul brother for me.
Yeah. Well, you've clearly lived a life of service and frankly self-sacrifice. Where do you think that came from, this desire to serve?
Well, it's a good question. I guess somewhere my family upbringing was an important element. My both parents lived to serve, and unconsciously I must have absorbed something of that from then, and just my vision of life. I studied theology, and then I was for many years a member of a religious movement, and I left all of that, and now I'm even called in a book on spirituality a representative of lay spirituality. But I've always felt very, very close to the Quakers. I feel they are extraordinary people, and as you know, in the history of the United States, you've always had Quakers right in the forefront of all movements of social improvement. They are just wonderful, wonderful people. So I've been very inspired also by George Fox and the example of the Quakers.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey there, something I want to tell you about today. My podcast platform, Buzzsprout, has recently made it easier for me to allow you to support me financially. Go to www.grieftogrowth.com/subscribe. That's grief2growth.com/subscribe. And once you're there, you can sign up to support me financially. Now, you can do it for as little as $3 a month, or of course, as much as you'd like. If you do that, you'll get access to bonus episodes, and you'll see those in the regular feed. They'll have a lock on them. But when you become a subscriber, you'll actually get access to your own private feed, and you'll be able to listen to the regular podcast along with the bonus podcast for the subscribers. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for sharing the podcast. And I want to thank those of you who support me financially. Have a great day, and on to the episode. So one of the things that I got from your publicist said, to talk with you about was this idea of imagining what it's like to never feel any resentment for any wrong done to you. So what is the key to that? What's the key to being able to get to that point?
Well, it's evidently not something that happens from one day to another. Maybe I can explain to you, Brian, how I discovered this practice of blessing.
Yes, please.
This is the key. I was working for a group of non-governmental organizations in Switzerland when I came back from Africa. And I'd been asked to start a new program on education on third world issues for schools. There was nothing like this similar in the schools in the 80s in Switzerland. And I threw myself with great gusto in this work. I even had a camp bed in my office when I missed the last train. And I wanted to do a roving exhibit for schools on world hunger. And these organizations said, "Well, sorry, Pierre, we don't have the money in our budget. You have to do without it." And Brian, I took out of my own savings the equivalent today of at least $25,000.
Wow.
And created this roving exhibit for schools, which worked very, very well. It was applauded by even my sponsors. But there was one guy in these organizations who was an atheist, a militant atheist, and he hated my guts. And he decided he wanted to get rid of me. And I was a member at the same time of an American campaign called the Hunger Project, the aim of which was to end hunger in the world. And I would have believed that organizations fighting hunger in Africa would be in alignment with this aim. Well, I think they were a bit leftist, and as this campaign came from the States, they forbid me to speak about it in schools, which I found crazy, but they were my bosses, so I obeyed. But I continued using the slogan of the campaign, "The end of hunger by the year 2000, because while I was in Africa, I was one of the founding members of what became the largest grassroots peasant organization of the whole continent, based in the Sahel. And one of the member organizations in Africa had as its slogan, "The end of hunger by the year 2000, which was the slogan of this American campaign. And one day, this guy who hated my guts convened a meeting of the four organizations, and they said, "We forbid you to say that we can end hunger by the year 2000 because this American hunger organization say that. These are organizations fighting hunger, Brian.
Yeah.
Forbidding me out of, I don't know, cheap anti-Americanism, or I don't know what. I think they wanted an excuse to get me off. So they told me, either you stop saying this slogan or you quit your work. And they'd schemed between themselves, saying, knowing Pierre's integrity, he will quit his job rather than trample on his personal conviction.
Right.
I did. So I quit my job immediately. But I developed such resentment against these people, especially this guy who'd organized this whole scheme to get rid of me.
Right.
And Brian, it was eating me up, literally eating my guts. You know, resentment is horrible. It's like a rat eating your entrails. It's awful. And I used to wake up in the morning, I was thinking of this, going to the supermarket, doing the housework, whatever, traveling. This became an obsession. And this resentment. And I knew I was harming myself. And I was praying, meditating, doing all the right things. Nothing happened. And it was awful. It lasted week after week, month after month. And one morning, reading the Sermon on the Mount, the statement, "Bless those who curse you." But of course, Pierre, it's so simple. You just have to bless them. And I started there and then. I started blessing these people in their health, in their family life, in their joy, in their abundance, in every conceivable manner. First, it was in the head, to obey what I believed a revealed commandment, but it soon moved down to the heart, because blessing is 100% heart energy. And then a few weeks later, suddenly, while walking in the street, I started blessing people in the street. And it became so joyful. I blessed people at the supermarket, walking around the city. When I used to take trains, I took trains a lot. I used to travel the whole train in both ways, from one tip to the other, to be sure not to miss any person, blessing every single person. And I started having amazing experiences with this practice of blessing. And one day I was preparing a talk. I'd been asked to give a conference at an international youth meeting in Zurich. And the theme of my talk was to be healing the world. And I was writing my talk, and suddenly I received a gust of inspiration as never before or since in my life. I was literally like someone under dictation. I received under dictation a one-page text on the gentle art of blessing, which is at the beginning of my book and the foundation of my book and the foundation of this practice. And I started sharing it with people in my letters, and people were saying, it heals, it heals, it heals. And I started receiving letters from all around the world, from people who were, applying this exercise.
Yeah.
That's how I felt it. But the most wonderful thing, 10 years later, I met at a meeting in Lausanne this gentleman who caused me to quit my job. Okay, this guy who hated my guts. I talked about him. And I met him at the meeting, and Brian, I felt like giving him a huge hug and embracing him. We had dinner together, and it was so joyful. And for days, my heart was singing.
Wow.
It took me years to understand what had happened. I believe, now this is a personal belief, that before coming on earth, he and I made what one calls a soul contract. That is, we each fixed out the roles we would play in our relationship so as to bless the world. So ultimately, this terrible trial was transformed into a blessing, which became the book, which has been translated now into quite a few languages, and including Arabic and Russian and others, and has blessed the world.
Wow.
So that's
what a beautiful story. I really appreciate you sharing that. So for people that aren't familiar, what does it mean to bless someone? What does that even mean?
For me, it means sending heart-based love energy to someone. Just sending focused energy. So I bless people in their health, in their joy, peace, in their family relations, in anything that I think can help them. When I don't have a car, so I travel a lot by public transport. And when I see someone who's depressed, I bless them in their peace, their joy, etc. Always the reverse of the material image. If I see a guy who's drunkard and who's wobbling around on the street, I'll bless him in his uprightness, his self-control, his maturity. God is like that. If I see a beggar in the street, I'll bless him in his abundance. Always the opposite of the material image facing you.
Wow.
And of course, if I see a young couple just getting married, I'll bless them in their happiness. There's nothing to reverse there. I'll just bless them in their happiness and their joy and their life together.
Now, some people are going to say, how am I supposed to bless someone who's done something wrong to me? I have this human thing that I feel resentment of, that I want to hold on to. So how do I get over that?
Well, one thing is to realize that any negative feeling you feel is harming you before it's harming anybody else. Any negative feeling harms our immune system. And I've got to understand this so clearly, Brian, that I can really say that I can see so clearly that every human being, be it Mr. Trump when he was in White House or a murderer who's being judged, is at his highest level of consciousness, or was at the time he did his misdemeanor. And in this way, Brian, I do not judge anyone at all.
Mm-hmm.
My life is totally free of judging others because I feel so deeply that everyone is at their highest level of consciousness. And it is so freeing to understand that.
Yeah,
And
I think
I don't feel judged by others. If I don't judge others, well, the judgments of others don't touch me.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important point that I want to reiterate, because I've come to that belief as well, and I know that's hard for some people to understand. When we look at another person's actions, to say they're doing the best that they can do, and that's what it means to not judge that person, is to say they're but we look at them and say, well, they can't be doing the best they can do because clearly what they're doing is wrong. So that's the temptation that a lot of people have, and that's I think that's the hurdle to get over with this non-judgment thing. And I know, especially as you mentioned, you kind of briefly touched on our charged political environment, especially here in the U.S., where everything is controversial here, everything is political, and we look at each other and we think they're trying to destroy our country. That's what both sides think about each other.
Yes. Absolutely. Well, we must be agents of a higher level of consciousness wherever we go.
Mm-hmm. Now, the thing is, and so you mentioned something earlier when you were speaking, and you mentioned the word practice, which I think is very important. It's a word that I use all the time with the clients that I work with. I think things need to be a practice. And the thing I love about your book, 365 Blessings to Heal Myself in the World, there just happen to be 365 days in the year. And we could go through this, and it's a great way to start this practice. Because sometimes people are like, how do I get started with this? And so you've kind of given us a framework.
Exactly.
So, and as I look through the book, and I love this because it's easy. And I know there's a Buddhist practice of blessing people unconditionally. We'll sit and we'll meditate, and we'll bless first, people that we like, and then people that we're kind of neutral about, and then eventually out to people that we don't like. And that can be a hard thing to do. But again, what I like about your book is you've got it all in there. You've got we're going to bless political leaders. We're going to bless terrorists. We're going to bless and their victims. And you tell us how to bless them, right? Not just have good feelings for terrorists, but how do I do that?
Yes, exactly. Yes, people need to know how, you see. You can't just tell people, oh, bless. You must show them how to bless.
Mm-hmm. Can you give us some examples of how we do that? So for example, how would I bless a terrorist?
Well, I would first bless him I believe that every single person on earth has a divine spark in them, and that even that terrorist has a divine spark. So I would bless him in his hidden divinity.
Mm.
I would bless him in his thirst for justice. He has a vision of justice which may be very distorted, but it's his highest vision. And I don't have a fixed guideline.
Mm-hmm.
I follow my inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
But I first try and develop a feeling of love and compassion, the person or the situation I am blessing. That's the most important, Brian, is the feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like what you said, seeing that divine spark in each person and trying to take their perspective. Okay. So the terrorists, we think, oh, they're terrorists, they're murderers. But as you said, they're seeking justice. It doesn't align with our sense of seeking justice, but just trying to understand that allows us to be able to let go of that judgment, at least a little bit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I've lived 11 years in Muslim countries, and I've seen situations that, especially in relation to women, that revolted me completely. But I had to go beyond that because that's still judging,
Yeah.
And I must know that that's their vision today of what is right. I hope they'll move forward one day, but today that is their vision. And I must not condemn them or judge them. I must embrace them.
Yeah. Now, would you say this idea of blessing people, you mentioned it came to you because it's Jesus' words in the Sermon on the Mount. And some people say, well, I'm not a Christian, so I don't have to follow that. So is this a religious thing or is this a spiritual thing, this idea of blessing?
This idea of blessing is spiritual. You find it the whole world over. Some of you noticed in my book, there are many Native American blessings.
Mm-hmm.
These were highly, profoundly spiritual people without being religious in the modern sense of the word.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a Native American spirituality which is very profound, very profound.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hi there, I'm really excited to tell you about my latest ebook. It's 4 lessons that you can learn from the near-death experience without going through all the trouble of dying to learn them. I've been studying NDEs for several years now. I am completely convinced that not only are they 100% real, but that there's some very universal wisdom that we can get from the near-death experience. And I've distilled that down in this book into 4 short lessons. And I've also given you all the reasons why I believe that NDEs are absolutely real. So go to www.grieftogrowth.com/NDE lessons to pick it up for free. www.growth.com/NDE lessons. I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, I agree, and I think we can sometimes get caught up in religion. So, what's your opinion about religion? So, what's going to happen with religions, you think, as mankind develops?
We'll get back to Grief to Growth in just a few seconds. Did you know that Brian is an author and a life coach? If you're grieving or know someone who is grieving, his book, Grief to Growth, is a best-selling, easy-to-read book that might help you or someone you know. People work with Brian as a life coach to break through barriers and live their best lives. You can find out more about Brian and what he offers at www.grieftogrowth.com, www.grief2growth.com, or text growth, GROWTH, to 31996. If you'd like to support this podcast, visit www.patreon.com/grief2growth, www.patreon.com/GRIEF2GROWTH to make a financial contribution. And now, back to Grief to Growth.
Brian, this is so interesting. I've just, the minute before I switched on to talk to you, I finished my monthly newsletter, which goes out to a bit more than 3,000 people, on the theme, is this the end of religion? Just a minute before.
Wow.
So I believe that religions in their structured, organized form will probably disappear. The one exception could be Judaism, because Judaism is attached to a nation, to ethnic practices. It's totally different from any other religion in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But apart from Judaism, I think it is my belief that other religions in their traditional form, especially Christianity, will disappear, and that new forms of spirituality will appear. I think that today I am much more spiritual than I was when I was, quotes, very religious and when I belonged to a church. I couldn't dream of going into church today, but I do believe for instance, I created a group in Geneva, which is totally non-denominational, non-religious, we call it a blessing and gratitude group, where we just bless people and situations. We meet every 2 weeks. Now we are doing through internet, of course, because of this COVID thing. Normally we gather together physically. And that's one of the new forms of spirituality that is popping up all around the world. People are inventing what speaks to them.
Yeah.
Not what the church decided 1,000 years ago should be done, but what speaks to them today.
Yeah, I think we are seeing a lot more of that. And, in the past, we lived in kind of religious silos. I think about if you were a Christian, you might never meet a Muslim. If you lived in the United States, you might never meet a Hindu. But when we get familiar with other people and we learn their practices and we realize they're all basically the same, they're all saying the same things, then I look at religion myself as kind of training wheels. It's something that we kind of need to bring us, to a certain level, but then we get to the point where we can take the training wheels off, and then we can practice spirituality.
Exactly, totally agree.
So, I was going to ask you about your view of the universe. How is the universe run? Is it chance? Are there laws?
I love that question. Because it enables me to share the most powerful, important experience in my whole life.
Oh, awesome.
Einstein asked the question, is the universe friendly? And my experience, for me, is my reply to Einstein's question. I was, for many years, I practiced a form of spirituality where spiritual healing was very important, central to the practice. And so I didn't run off to doctors when I had a problem. I worked it out spiritually, and it worked well for many years. I no longer do that now, but it worked well for many years. And I was in Africa at a meeting of this large peasant organization in the early 90s, this was. And the last day I caught dysentery. Well, no, the last 2-3 days of meeting. At the beginning, it's not serious. If it's not treated, if it's not healed, it can become serious. But it's just a nuisance. You have to run the whole time to the toilet. And we finished our meeting a little early, and we had the last afternoon free. So I spent my whole afternoon with my books and mantras and affirmations, working on this problem, and I believe that it disappeared. And I went out for dinner with an African friend in an African restaurant, and the next morning, going to the airport, it started all over again. And on the plane, I was with my books, with my mantras, with my affirmations, and repeating statements, and I was sitting next to a young, unaccompanied boy, about 10 years old, with his little label on his chest with his parents' phone address and all that. And the stewardess taking care of him was so loving, so sweet. You would have thought she was his mother. She constantly came to check that he was okay, if he needed something. And one moment she came to talk to him, and she spoke in such a kind manner. Suddenly I felt for this woman a cosmic gratitude. I can't say it otherwise. My whole life, my whole mind was just totally filled with gratitude.
Mm.
And suddenly I had an out-of-body experience. I was no longer in the plane. I was no longer in time. I was in a space where there was only the most incredible, unbelievable sense of love.
Hmm.
And it was entirely on the level of feeling, Brian, on the heart.
Mm-hmm.
It was not in the mind. For some moments, Pierre Pradervand had disappeared. He wasn't there. The ego wasn't there. I had no sense of existing as a person, as a male Swiss. All I was conscious of was this infinite love. And as an American spiritual writer of last century said, Mary Baker Eddy, the divine understanding reigns, is all. And there is no other consciousness. But there was no other consciousness but the felt consciousness of love. I don't know how long this lasted, maybe 2-3 minutes or 30 minutes, because I was out of town. Suddenly I came back to my seat. I was sitting next to the little boy. I felt something move in my entrails. The dysentery disappeared in a few seconds. But above all, I'd had the most important vision in my life. And Brian, this vision is today the heart of my spirituality, the totality of my spiritual belief. My spirituality has become so simple. I don't have to read books, learn Torahs or laws or mantras or Bible statements. I just have to feel this love and share it. Loving more has become the only thing important for me, and it is all my spirituality.
Wow. Well, you know, the people, NDEers tell us that everything is love, that it's all one. We're all one consciousness. People that have gone to the other side, people who've quote died, and they tell us that. And then, you know, physicists are starting to tell us now there's just everything is one, everything is connected, and the consciousness is actually fundamental. And so, and then we hear that God's another word for love. So you put all that together, and really what it comes down to is everything's about love. But it sounds too simple to people.
Well, maybe it sounds too simple to them. I don't mind. I can only speak from my deep experience. I know that for me, this is the path I wish to tread, and none other.
Yeah. Another thing that you touched upon there, I think that was really important. You know, we were talking about blessing, right? We're talking about blessing ourselves, because the other thing I failed to mention in the book, there's blessings for everybody else, but there are also a lot of blessings for ourselves, because we have to love ourselves as well. And, you know, one of the things I found as a key is to have gratitude. And sometimes people struggle with, how do I have gratitude? I was telling you before we started the show, most of my listeners are in grief. We've lost a child or a spouse or a brother or a sister or whatever. So sometimes people have trouble saying, how can I have gratitude when my life is so terrible? So the thing about your book and your practice is a way of bringing us out of that.
Yes. By sending love to others, you pull yourself out of your own grief. You stop staying centered on your pain, and you send love and good wishes and good feelings to others. And that helps you get over your own pain.
Yeah, I think that's really, really key and really important. And I can see, as you were talking, as you've developed this practice of blessing others, how it's helped you know, with your gratitude. You're so full of joy and gratitude about life, because you're seeing us all as connected.
Yes. I mean, I just, you know, I live in a little house with 3 rooms and a little garden, and we're having a very nice weather now. And my lunch every day is just raw vegetables. And I'm sitting in my chair and just feeling such incredible gratitude. But also, you see, because I know what misery is. For 5 years in Dakar, I lived literally between 2 shanty towns, not a mile away, maybe 200 yards away, on both sides. And I developed close contacts with some of the inhabitants. And I've traveled, as you said, to over 40 countries
of
the world. And I have also seen such profound misery. And so I know how incredibly blessed I am. And I'm aware of it, and I give thanks every day.
Yeah. You touched about something earlier when you were talking about blessing, and you don't focus so much on the material. And I hear people talk about abundance. We want to live in abundance. And I heard something just a few days ago that really resonated with me. The idea of abundance is the ability to do what you want to do when you want to do it.
Everyone has his definition of abundance.
Mm-hmm.
And the abundance is an inner state of deep contentment. I had a large fortune, Brian. I've given away absolutely everything. I've kept just a little minimum extra. I mean a little, just in a case of a real emergency. I have enough to live decently, but I have, I don't take long trips around the world. I don't have a car. I don't even have TV. I live extremely, I'd even say frugally, but I'm happy.
Yeah.
When I see people who have these mansions and 3 cars and go and spend their vacation on Bali, polluting the world environment and all that, they're not any happier. Maybe much less because they're afraid of losing their fortune. I don't have anything to lose.
Yeah.
So, no, life is what we make it, right? It's not a question of chance. Life is what we choose to make it.
So when you say life is what we make it, do you mean choosing our perspective on what happens to us, or do you mean something even beyond
choosing
that?
Our perspective on what happens to us. We may not choose at all what happens to us, but we can choose our perspective. I think I mentioned at the beginning of our talk, I don't remember, that this letter I received from Thailand, from Bang Kwang Central Prison. This is one of the most horrendous prisons in the world.
Right.
And this young prisoner who says he's in there for a crime he never committed, which I'm ready to believe him. They have no lawyers or whatever, And he read this book by my friend Roger McGowan, completely changed his perspective on life. He thought, well, if Roger can find deep happiness on death row, well, I can change my attitude towards this imprisonment.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. We read books like Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, and we say if he could be happy, then maybe I could be happy in my circumstance. Exactly. I have a friend I interviewed for the program. Her name is Terry Dillion, young woman who in her mid-30s was struck by Lou Gehrig's disease, and so she's paralyzed now. She can't even speak. She communicates with her eyes through a computer. But you read, somebody like that can find peace and joy in their circumstance, and so we can choose. I tell people, it's an old analogy, but it works. The glass half full, the glass half empty. Which are we going to focus on? Are we going to focus on what we don't have, or are we going to focus on what we do have?
Brian, this is such a simple metaphor: the glass half full or half empty. And yet it's so fundamental to all of life. every second, Brian, we are choosing which half of the glass we want to see. Every second.
Right.
So if some people manage to see half a glass half full when they're in the extremes of hell, and I mean the extremes of hell, well, maybe we can see that in circumstances which for most of the people listening to this program, a little less dire.
Yeah, exactly. And I said that's when I read your book, when I looked through the book, I was like, I love the fact because you give us a practical way of doing this for people that are, because we as human beings, it's this natural thing to focus on what's wrong. It's part of an evolutionary process, right? We focus on the problem so we can fix the problem, so we can solve the problem. That's part of our nature. So we should not feel guilty or feel bad about that. But it doesn't mean we have to stay in it. We can learn to rise above that, to raise our perspective.
Exactly. By the way, I want to tell you, I'm so enjoying our exchange, Brian.
I am so also. I like I said, for me, I'm an engineer by background, and I coach people. So my thing is, don't just tell someone you have to do this thing, right? Again, especially someone that's grieving or someone's going through a hard circumstance, and we're all going through hard circumstances. We all have things we can look at and say, I wish this was different. But again, a practical approach is like, how do I do this? So, to tell someone here's do these things for 365 days. Actually, if you do it for 30 days, I believe it'll change your life. Exactly. I think if you got up and did a short blessing, because people are intimidated by meditations, I don't know how to pray, stuff like that. Just do a short thing for 30 days in a row.
And they don't have to compose the blessing. They just have to read it and ponder it. It.
Yeah. Read it and feel it. Read it and take it to heart and try to understand that person's perspective. And I was reading the one about blessing the terrorists earlier before we got on the interview. And I think that's so profound because we tend to see things from our own point of view. Of course, that's who we are, right? So when I see you doing something that I wouldn't do, I say, well, you must have bad motives, whether you're my political enemy or whether you're physically trying to, hurt me, you're a terrorist. And just to make that shift for a little while and to say, what if I were in that person's shoes? And what if they truly are divine? And what if they are doing the best that they can do? Because we give ourselves the benefit of the doubt. We can justify anything that we do. I did this because I was justified in it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think the book and your practice and your life is something I'm really glad to share this with my listeners because I think it's so simple yet it's so profound, and it's a shift that I think a lot of us struggle with. And I love the fact that you've given us an example by the way you've lived your life. I mean, this is not just words. This is what you do. And then you've given us practical tips. How do we do it?
Exactly.
So how can people find out more about you, more about your work and what you do?
Well, they just go on internet. There's such a lot of stuff on internet, on videos, on YouTube and things like that. So I guess that's but the best thing is the website on blessing, because my professional website is in French. So that would be very helpful.
Not to my headings now.
But then there's also the website on Roger McGowan that I gave the address of Melbourne. Yeah,
and I'll put that in the show notes. But I know you're when you talk about your professional website, you talk about Gentle Heart of Blessing, right?
Exactly.
gentleheartofblessing.org.
The art of blessing.
Gentle. I'm sorry, I wrote it down wrong. Gentle Art of Blessing. I apologize. Thanks for correcting me. So gentleartofblessing.org. That's where we can find about your practice.
Exactly.
And the book is 365 Blessings to Heal Myself and the World. I highly recommend it to people if you really want to get into this practice and you need a framework. You need something and just try it for 30 days, and then I think you'll keep going.
I would suggest that people first go to my website on blessing, and on the home page, there's an extraordinary, a fabulous video by our webmaster, Jane Young, called The Gentle Art of Blessing. And that video has been seen by hundreds of thousands of people on YouTube all around the world.
Wow, okay.
And I think it will really, really speak to people, because the video itself is so beautifully made. The combination of pictures, of music, of text is just very special.
Yeah, and I know, again, a lot of people that are in grief, we sometimes harbor resentment for whoever caused our grief. We feel like, my life is never going to get any better. My life is so bad, and we need like a ladder. We need a ladder with rungs to kind of dig out of or to climb out of the state that we're in. And I think that's what your work offers to people.
I think in French, my best-selling book is on No Longer a Victim. And as a matter of fact, it's one of the best-selling books of my publishers. It sold tens and tens of thousands of copies. And I think this is one of the three main challenges of life. So many people feel victim.
Yeah.
As long as they feel victim, they will stay stuck in what I call victimitis.
Yeah.
And only they can get themselves out of that.
Well, and that brings us back to another point I want to make, because when you were telling your story about how you discovered this art of blessing, the situation that caused it, that could be viewed as a terrible thing that happened to you. You were forced out of a job that you loved. And so what we find, though, as we get some age in ourselves, and as we get some distance from these bad things that happen, is something good comes out of pretty much everything that happens to us. There's always some blessing that we can find in it if we look for it. And that's what you did. You found, I guess, maybe the biggest blessing of your life.
Exactly. And, I really believe, and I repeat every day to myself, sometimes 3-4 times a day, that all things work to good. All things work together to the good of them that love life. All things work towards our good if we love life. Everything. There cannot be an absolutely negative situation in our life if we decide we're not going to accept it as absolutely negative. We are the ones who decide always.
Yes. I think that is an excellent point. And it's something that, again, it's not necessarily human nature, but we have to keep reinforcing that in ourselves and keep looking for those blessings.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Pierre, I want to thank you very much for your time today. It's been a real pleasure to meet you and to talk about your life and your book and your work. It's all fascinating and such a blessing to the world.
Right. It was my blessing, and I thank you for inviting me to this program, which I know is helping many people in deep need.
Thanks. Have a great rest of your day.
Great blessing on your program and all the listeners. May their heart lighten up. Goodbye, Brian.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Grief to Growth. Brian hopes that you find this episode helpful and will come back for future episodes. Brian's best-selling book, Grief to Growth, Planted Not Buried, is a great resource for anyone who is coping with grief or knows someone who is. If you enjoy the podcast and would like to support it, there are 3 things you can do to help. The first is to share the podcast with someone that you think it will help. The second is to go to iTunes, rate, and review the episode. The third way you can support the podcast is by becoming a patron. Head over to www.patreon.com/grief2growth. That's patreon.com/grief, the number 2, growth, and sign up to make a small monthly donation. Patrons get access to exclusive bonus content and knowledge that you are helping to spread the message of grief to growth. For more about Brian and Grief to Growth, Visit www.grief2growth.com.
Hi there. I hope you enjoyed this latest episode of the podcast, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. What questions came up for you? What did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? I invite you to visit us at grief2growth.circle.so. That's grief2growth.circle.so to continue the conversation with me and with other listeners. It's a space to sound off, to share reactions, and to go deeper into the topics from the show. I look forward to chatting more, and I hope to see you there.